Good morning. So we are we are doing today Mem Hey Mem Vav and Aleph. We are starting Mem Hey and Beis. We are at the two dots. Perfect timing, says the Gemara. Gufa. So we already discussed this Gemara yesterday. Gufa Marabdimi Bar Yosef Amar Rab. So Rabbi Bar Yosef says the name of Rab. If three people are eating together as one, and one of them goes to the shuk, so we said we have to call him. We have to include him in the zimun. We call him and then we make a zimun over him. So Amar Abai now explains that what do we mean when we call him and we make a zimun over him? Amar Abai v'hu v'ani, that we call him and he answers. Here we have Machlekes Rashi and the Benuchanano. What does it mean? We call him and he answers. Let's look at Rashi. So Rashi says, "V'hu dekarele v'ani shesoimechu etzlam." He's close enough to them, v'oina baruchu, and he's able to answer what they say. That's what's mashma v'ani. V'ani means that he's able to answer to the berachas, to the zimun that they are making. Look at Rabbeinu Chananel. What does it mean that he is responding? It says Rabbeinu Chananel, Pirish, the Shami Kala, he hears their voice. The Omar Asina Asina. He says, I'm coming, I'm coming. But he doesn't actually have to say a response to the Zimun. In other words, when we learned the Gemara yesterday, the Gemara seemed to say that you have to call the guy. He has to be close enough that he has to turn around. And so long as he turned around, you could be included. And it sounded like Abaya is now putting an additional point. He has to answer. What does it mean he has to answer? He has to answer to the Zimun. And that will be an additional point that we didn't have clarified yesterday. Or, no, V'ani has to be that he has to say, I'm coming, I'm coming. In other words, that he's returning, but you can already make the zimun. You don't have to actually wait for him to return. He doesn't actually have to answer the zimun. So that would seem to be a distinction between Rashi and the Rabbeinu Chananel. Continues the Gemara. Amar Mar, Mar Zutra. So Mazutra says, this heter, when you have one person who leaves a group of three, that he's on the way to the shuk, and you call him, and he says, I'm coming, or he's able to answer, meaning that he's close enough, that only works if you have a zimun of 3. But if you have a zimun of 10, you have to have everybody there. It can't be that one of the guys is hanging out off to the side on the way to the shuk. That will not count as 10. What's the difference? So the issue is Haskaras Hashem. Look at Rashi. Because by 10 you're going to now say Elokeinu. In order to be able to say Elokeinu, you have to have 10 people actually there. Mask for Rav Ashi. So Rav Ashi asks on this. He says, what are you talking about? Smash for the reverse. Why? Tisha Ner and Kasara. When you look at a group of a lot of people, if you see 9, you're going to see the difference between 9 and 10? Nah, you don't really see the difference. So Tisha Ner and Kasara, Shnaim Ein Ner and Kishloisha. But when you have 3, it's 100% clear that you have 3. If you have 2, it's 100% clear that you have 2. No one's going to ever make a mistake. Says Rashi Ner and Kasara. The Ein Adam Mimahar Lahavchim and Asar Latisha. It's not so easy for a person to tell the difference between 9 and 10. You have to start doing like Shia, Es, Amecha. It's not so clear. So the difference is not so clear. The 100% says Rav Ashi that the mistavra is the other way. That if you are having a group of zimun for 10 and one of them leaves, it's not such a big deal that he's not there. You should be able to be calling the guy, and so long as he's close enough, it should be sufficient. But the what do you call Marzutra disagreed. Marzutra says no. It has to be only in the case of 3 that you can get away with this heter. But by 10, everybody has to be there. And the Gemara says, we do, in fact, paskin like Marzutra. In other words, what is the Gemara telling us? The Gemara is telling us that even if it makes sense, like Rav Ashi, that you can't really tell the difference between 9 and 10, the halacha is nevertheless like Marzutra. My time, says the Gemara, came in the boy like Kurishem Shemaim, since you have to mention Shem Shemaim, since you have to say Lekenu, and you have 10 people at a Zimun, it's not normative to do so if you do not have all 10 there. So in other words, what the Gemara is telling us here is Machlekes Marzutra and Rav Ashi. According to Marzutra, the fundamental point is not how it looks. It's not an issue. Well, does it look like you have 10 here? Maybe it looks like you have 9, then you can get away with it. Or does it look like you have 2 or 3 and you can't get away with it? It's not an issue of how it looks. This is what you're saying. You're saying Elikenu, you need to have 10 people actually there or it doesn't work. And Rav Ashi is saying the idea is not what you're saying per se. It is also dependent on what it would seem like. Does it look like you're making a zimun without having actually the people there? In the case of 3 and you're missing one, it's very clear that you're making a zimun and there's missing one. The fact that somebody's there doesn't really work. But by 10, you're missing one. It looks like you have 10. No one's going to really see the difference. So the question between them, the dispute between them is, what are you more chayshish for? What it's going to seem like to others, or what you're actually saying? And according to my Zukta, since you're actually saying Shem Shamayim, you're saying Elikenu, you have to have actually 10 sitting there in front. And that's how we pass them Allah. We're not worried about the crowd. We are, in fact, going to be Mako on the situation of 3, but not on the situation of 10. Just one point is the Gemara here says, Lav Eirach Ara. You remember we had that Gemara earlier on Zion Amud Aleph. The Gemara talks about the Shimon Levi wanting to kill some Saduki guy who was bothering him a lot. So he got a chicken, right, a rooster, and he was going to wait for the moment when the crown turned white, because of the fact that that was the moment that Hashem supposedly gets angry, and Bilam was able to discern that moment. And then when he was doing that, if you remember what happened once, he fell asleep and he wasn't able to curse. So he says, Shema mina de lav erech ara. It's not normative to do this, and therefore he desisted and didn't use this method to try to get rid of this person. So again, the Gemara is over here saying is that when you are bringing in Shem Shemayim, when you're going to say Hashem, you're going to say the Rebbeinu Shalom, it's la erech ara to do so with less than 10. It's not normative. We have to do it. What's normative, and normative is that 10 people are actually there. Continues the Gemara. We will see. I think you probably discussed a little bit, or maybe you didn't, but I discussed yesterday when I did the recording of this Amud, or this half an Amud that I did yesterday. So we will discuss later on in Mem Zion this Shita Rabbeinu Simcha. It's brought down in the Mordechai 2 times. Rabbeinu Simcha has brought down about this topic. So one is in relation to Zimun, that he holds that you could have a woman included, right? In terms of Tziruf, you had the whole discussion yesterday about Tziruf. You can listen to it on my thing also, if you didn't. But he also says that a woman can be included in a minyan, right? In a situation of Shas and Chag. And it's famously, right, about Shulchan Aruch Harav and Lubavitch, about kids using a sefer and all that. We'll get into that later on in Mem Zayin. In any event, for our purposes now, we need to have 10. We're saying Elikenu. It has to be actual 10 there. We're not talking about a Shas Chag situation, normal situation. Continues the Gemara. Okay, so we're up to Amar Abaya. So Abaya said the following. Amar Abaya Naktinon Shnayim She'ochlu Ke'achas Mitzvah Lecholik. If you have 2 people that they ate together as one, they should separate when it comes to benching. What does it mean that they should separate when it comes to benching? Rashi explains, Ulevarach kol echad, and each one should make a bracha b'fnei atzmai, bein berchas hamoitzi, bein berchas hamazon. You see, you notice what Rashi did? Rashi puts in that if you have 2 people eating together a meal, they should make separately benching, and separately they should make hamoitzi. You shouldn't have anybody being relying on anyone else. Mitzvah lecholik. If you look at Rabbeinu Chananel says that what we're discussing here is not a situation of Berchas Hamazon and Hamaitzi. Says I'm not saying it here in no. I'm not seeing it in Mechanano. It's Rabbeinu Yaina. Rabbeinu Yaina, if you look in the back, Rabbeinu Yaina says, this is on page Lamed Gimel and Rabbeinu Yaina. So Rabbeinu Yaina says that what do you call? Shnayim she'achlu mitzvah lechalik, be'birchas hamaitzi echad mevarach lechaveroi. When it comes to hamaitzi, one makes a bracha for the other one. When it comes to benching, they should do it separately. It says Lamed Gimel and Dapei Arif. So Amr Rabbeinu Shmuel. So what did Rashbam say? What's the reason for that? That the difference between Hamaitzi. In other words, Rashi says that when you have two people eating together as one, they each should make a separate Hamaitzi and they each should bench separately. According to the Rashbam, they should make Berachas Hamazon separately, but Hamaitzi, one could be Yaitzi the other one. Why, says the Rashbam? Shetam Adavim Shon the Berachas Hamaitzi Himi D'Rabbanan. Because Berachas Hamaitzi is rabbinic. Because since it's rabbinic, one person can be somebody else. But when it comes to Berachas Hamazon, Sheim Not Torah, Hechmir B'Yosef. It's the bottom of the page there in the Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph on the Daf Yerif, or I should say in my version of it. But when it comes to Berachas Hamazon, it's the right. So then each one should do their own bracha. Rabbeinu Yitzchak has zaken. And then the Rabbeinu Yonah brings down another position from Rabbeinu Yitzchak HaZaken. He said that the difference between Berachas Hamazon and Hamaitzi is the following. The reason is because when you are coming to benching, your Kviyas Suda is over. You had two people sitting together and now they're finished. The Kvaris are Kviyas, they're just two people, and the Kviyas of the Suda is finished, they're about to separate. We're going to judge it like two people separately, like each person ate separately. But by Berachas Hamaitzi, when they're being Kaveh the Suda together, so then one can be able to match the other one. So in other words, two different reasons brought down by Rabbeinu Yonah as to why, when it comes to Hamaitzi, one is able to be mitzi the other one, either because Hamaitzi is the Rabbanan, or because at that time you're being Kaveh Suda. Whereas Rashi disagrees. And Rashi says, no, if you have two people eating together as one, each person should make his own Hamaitzi. But everyone agrees that if two people sitting together as one, each one has to make their own Berachas Hamazon. In other words, what we said yesterday, if you remember, the Machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rav, we weren't sure which one said what, but we ended up deciding it was Rabbi Yochanan who said that you can't have a zimun of two. We do, in fact, paskin like that. And so if you have two people eating together, each one has to make their own Berachas Hamazon. They're not mizam one to the other. The more continues. We have a brayso like this as well. If you have two people eating together as one, it's a mitzvah for each of them to separate out again. For sure, everybody agrees that with regards to Berachas Hamazon, each one should make their separate Berachas Hamazon. The Gemara now explains, when do we say this? Kishish name Seifrim. That's if they're both well educated, right? Seifrim, they both know how to learn. But if one person's a Seifrim, one person's a bar, in other words, he doesn't know anything, so then Seifrim Mavarech or bar Yaitse. Then the Seifr is going to be the one who makes the Berachas Hamazon, and he will, essentially be mitzi the bar, because the bar doesn't know how to bench. Doesn't know how to do it. Now, a couple of things. Number one, you remember that back on the Gemara we had on Chacham and Beis, the Gemara said, not very flatteringly, the Gemara said, a curse is going to come on a person whose wife or his children are making Berachas Hamazon for him. Like, it's not ideal. First, be able to make their own Berachas Hamazon. So what do we mean when we say a bar? Sounds like this guy can't bench for himself at all. But if you remember, you had a Taisus yesterday, Taisus in Shiny Hassam on Amham Beis. So Taisus said a question which is discussed in Halacha: is it better for a woman to be mitzi with her husband's benching, or is it better for her to bench for herself? So the question was, if a person is able to be mitzi, if they don't understand anything, if they just listen, they understand nothing, is that work or not? So Taisus wanted to bring a right from this Gemara. Because the Gemara says that you have a sefer and a bar, that the sefer is going to make the Berachas Hamazon for the bar. So the Taisus said that sounds like, if you look in the second half of the Taisus, sounds like in that situation, they don't really understand. So someone wanted to bring a Rav, Yesh Mevin Rashi Yotzis. Why? The common sefer from Mevarach and Bar Yotzis, and the fact that it says that the sefer is making the brachot of Berachas Hamazon and the bar is Yotzis. So then it seems that what? That the Nashim are going to be Yotzis Berachas Hamazon, because they will be equivalent to the bar in this case, and therefore they're able to be Yotzis even if they don't understand. Miu says it's not a good raya. Why? Yesh litchos oisaraya, the shiny borsha, mavim loshan hakodesh. We're talking about a bar who understands Hebrew. The yedek tzas, my comer, and it says a little bit what's being said. Avol in yedek levarech, but he doesn't know how to bench. Avol nashim she'enam mevinas klal, matzilem dolanaf. Maybe women who don't understand anything. They don't understand a lesson in kodesh. Maybe they can't even be yetz at all. So in other words, from this Gemara, Abai is telling us that Shnaim she'ochel ka'achas, if all things being equal, two Talmid Chacham, two regular people who know how to bench, they understand. So they, of course, should make their own benching, as we already said yesterday. We passed on Rabbi Yochanan, and there is no zimun for two. Okay, continues the Gemara. Okay, so we are up to the two dots on Memhem Beis, the two dots on Memhem Beis, yeah, Amar Rava, yeah, says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Ham Milsa Misa Novi Tevim Mishmei Rabbi Zeir Kavase. The Rava says, I said over an idea, and then I heard that they said over the same thing like me by Rabbi Zeir. Rabbi Zeir says like me. So Amar Rava saying, Ham Milsa Misa Ano, I said it. And they say it over that Rabbi Zeir said something like me. In other words, Rav is this future, later generation. Rav is not saying, I'm quoting it from Rabbi Zeir. No, I said it. In other words, when you come up with something, with an idea, it's your idea, even if in the previous generation somebody said it. But if you came up with it independent, it's still your idea. But of course, you can say that they brought it down, right? They came up with it first. So Rav is quoting Rabbi Zeir, even though he's still saying it and tying it to himself. So what's the idea? You have two people who eat. Sorry, three people. I apologize. Three people were eating together as one, and then you have a situation that happened all the time, right? In yeshiva, right, or and people eating together by work, where they're eating, but then one of them has to rush back, right? Has to leave. So what do you do? So if you have three people eating together as one, if there's two people who want to go back to work or want to go whatever they have to do, and one guy's still eating, the halacha is one has to be mafsik for two. But two don't have to mafsik for one. In other words, if one guy wants the meal to be over, the two don't have to stop for him. Okay? Now we have to understand here's another machlokes rishonim. Says Rashi, echad mafsik l'shnayim. According to the opinion of Rashi, what does it mean like this? Im gamru hashnayim su dasav v'ritzim l'zamein. If two people finish their meal, now they want to make a zimun. Derech eretz hu. According to Rashi, is it a chiyuv? No. Rashi says it's derech eretz. It's a normative thing to do. It's a nice thing that the single person should be mafsik his suda. Achi zamnu love ad berchas hazon, the berchas zimun. The chayz become does it, then he can go and finish his meal. But the two don't have to be mafsik for the one who wants to be finished his meal. So again, according to Rashi, what's the word? Three people eating together. One guy, two people are finished. One guy is not finished. So it's derech eretz that the one guy should mafsik his meal and let the two bench, and then he can finish his meal. According to Rabbeinu Chananel, the echad chayiv lahafsik l'shnayim. It's not a derech eretz word. The one person must be mafsik for the two. Then if he wants to afterwards finish his meal, he can finish his meal, but he has to say amaitzi and it's v'chachers and it's lachs of the others say no, he doesn't have to go back and say over amaitzi. But in any event, the machlekes here between Rashi and Chananel is it derech eretz or is it a chiyuv? According to Rashi, it's a derech eretz thing. According to Rabbeinu Chananel, it's an actual chiyuv. Okay, continues the Gemara. We'll come back in a minute to this. We have to finish up on this Rashi and Rabbeinu Chananel again. But loy fet Gemara, you're saying that in a situation where you have one person finishing and two people still eating, that the two people don't have to stop. What do you mean? When Rav Papa was sitting in a meal with his son, Abba Mar, and there was somebody else with Rav Papa, and Abba Mar finished eating, Rav Papa stopped, and the third person, they stopped, and they let his son bench and move on. Says the more shiny Rav Papa, The situation Rav Papa was doing Lefnim Mishra Sadin. He didn't have to do this. He did it. He did Lefnim Mishra Sadin to let him and another person to let the third one finish, to let the son finish and make a zimun. They didn't have to do that. They did it, but it was Lefnim Mishra Sadin. I find it funny, right? Or not funny. It's cute, but it happens to be also on Zion Amud Aleph. This is the last time we had Lefnim Mishra Sadin, or the only other time in Brachos we had it. Talk about Haim and base, but it wasn't using the lashon, right? Rav Huna with the most of the gan begun the time at on. But if you look at Memra Zion Ben Aleph, what did the Gemara say over there? Rabbi Shimon ben Elisha. He davened to the Ben Shalom. What did he daven? Remember the Gemara? The Gemara says, right? He had a whole thing, he made a song. Right? But what was the lashon of the Gemara? This ikonis land lifnim mishra sadin. He said that you should do with the Jewish people lifnim mishra sadin. So it's the same thing. We have two times in that same Gemara right here in the same lines here. Okay. Now, so it comes out then that lamais la'alocha, you have three people eating. Two people are finished. One guy either is derech eretz or must stop and be mafsik and be yotze with the zimun of the others. Vice versa, if you have one person finished and two people are not finished, they do not have to stop at all. However, they may. If they want to go, if they want to be sweet and nice, they could. Says Rabbi Nechanan, Pirsh, they don't have to be mafsik. But if they want to, they may. This is clearly from our sugya. Now, I want to go back to a Rashi here, and we'll have to come back, but this is a fundamental point. Notice in the Rashi we just did, Echad Mafsek L'Shnayim. Rashi told us, Im Gamu Shnayim Sudasa V'Ertzin L'Zam Derech Eretz V'Shei Echad Mafsek Sudasa. Now listen to the lashon that in Derech Eretz that one should mafsek is Seuda, and she is Zamnu Alav until they make a zimun on him. Ad Birchas Hazan, until Birchas Hazan. Dahainu Birchas Zimun, until Birchas Hazan. What's the Brachot of Hazan? Hazan as Olam Kuloi B'Tuvai, right? That's the Brachot of Hazan. The Hainu Birchas Zimun, because that is the bracha of Zimun. What does that mean? What does that mean? Sounds like from Rashi, if I'm reading it correctly, that Rashi is suggesting that when you have three people eating together as one, two people are what? Two people are done. One guy is not. Derech Eretz or Zechiyuv, then he has to wait at Birchas Hazan, the Hainu Birchas Zimun. That when they say, Rabbi Yisrael Belbenchen, Yishem Hashem Mevarach, and they say Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu Hazan, and they finish, then he can go back to eating. But before that, he shouldn't go back. He has to wait for that first bracha. That's pretty clear from Rashi, yes? Because Birchas Hazan is Birchas Zimun. Okay, let's bear that in mind. We'll come back to that soon. I just want to point out what Rabbeinu Yonah says over here. Rabbeinu Yonah has a note. Again, we're on Lamed Gimel over there. Lamed Gimel Maraf not here in my version of it. So he says the lashon of Rabbeinu Yonah was as follows. He said, "Ein beis mafsikin le'echad." That if you have two people, you don't have to be mafsik for the one. Right? If biyachad, if three people eating together as one, and he says that one of the people has something very urgent that he has to go to. So notice that he's already declaring that he can't just it's not enough that you finished eating. The fact that you finished eating, very nice. But you have to have a davar nachutz. You have to have something urgent in order for you to be able to say, okay, look, I need a bench. Right? But the two haven't yet finished their eating. Even if you have a davar nachutz, they don't have to stop. Of course, if you don't have a davar nachutz, you shouldn't be leaving. Only this discussion happens, according to Rabbeinu Yonah is saying, is only in a situation you have something very urgent. Without it being urgent, there's nothing to even open up the conversation. From Rashi, we didn't notice that. We just told him a situation and finished eating. And my assumption is that you just don't want to be there anymore. You want to move on to the next, you go back to whatever you're going to do. No, says Rabbeinu Yonah, there has to be a davar nachutz. And I wonder if he's talking about just in the situation of ein beis mafsikin le'echad and vice versa. In other words, that in the situation where the two people want to move on, do you have to say davar nachutz over there? I would assume not. The reason he's bringing it up only the situation of one person wanting to bench when there's two others who are still eating is because that's the only time you have the ability to leave. But when you have the two people who are sitting and they're now done, they don't have to have a davar nachot. They're done. They want to move on. They don't need to have an urgent reason. They just want to finish because they're finished. והשניים לגמרי עדיין אכילוסם. אין השניים חייבים להפסיק, ושיזדמנו עם האחד, ואחר כך יחזרו לאכילוסם. So what do you call it? The two don't have to be mafsik. They can. If they do, then they can be chayzer to the achila if after the zimun of the one guy. Or they have a choice. But the one, when the situation is where the two are done, then he has to be mafsik for the two. Like in other words, like Rabbeinu Chananel, not like Rashi. And after he finishes his zimun, he can return to his eating. I should just point out that in the Shiltei Giberim, it brings down a machlokes about whether or not you have to wash again, whether or not you have to say hamaitzi again, and the like. So the lemaisa is that you don't have to. At least that's the way it seems to the Paskins, is that they would be able, because if you look at the in Dalit in the Shiltei Giberim. So Rashi Maimoni cuts with the derech eretz who le'echol sheyafsek l'shnayim be'en chiyuv v'Rabbeinu Chanan v'Rav Rabbeinu Yonah cuts with the chiyuv who le'echol sheyafsek l'shnayim. That's what we just said. And then he continues the Pirish Rashi Mafsek Yishachayzer le'echol mevarech hamaitzi. Rabbeinu Chanan, as he pointed out, one of the versions of Rabbeinu Chanan said you have to make another hamaitzi. V'chein cuts with Rabbeinu Hai. V'chein harav v'shetor gam tzilas yadayim. Rabbeinu Yonah v'Arash v'Ator cuts with the ein tzarach tzilas yadayim v'lei hamaitzi. Which is how we do it today, right? When people when they have to bench and they want to leave, so they make a zimun. So then you just answer, right? And then you go back to eating. You don't have to wash again. You don't have to make another hamaitzi, etc. So that would be lemaisa how we do it. In fact, but again, as we say from this Rashi, you have to listen to that. Not just the zimun. You have to also listen to that first bracha. Okay, continues the Gemara. Says the Gemara, they were all eating together. No one was greater than any of the other ones in order to be making the bracha of zimun. So Yasif becoming Bailu. So they decided to ask themselves a question. This is what we said in the Mishnah. Then when you have three people eating together, they have to make a zimun. Maybe that's a situation when the mechuyev to have a zimun, you have an adam gadol, when you have one person who's greater. But when you have them all eating together, then chiluk brachas adif. When no one's equal, when everyone's equal, no one's greater than anyone else, then maybe it's better to have separate benching from each one. Now, let's look at Rashi. First, Rashi says, nobody was greater than any of the other ones in terms of chachma or zikna. Right? In terms of age, they were all the same. And in terms of wisdom, they were all the same. You notice Rabbeinu Chananel doesn't say that. Rabbeinu Chananel just says, he doesn't mention zikna at all. I'm not sure why. Right? If they have zikna, maybe, remember we had that Gemara. Right? We had the Gemara with, Bar Kapar. What did Bar Kapar say? Bar Kapar said that chachma ain't kan but zikna ain't kan. Even if you don't, they have the proper respect. That is what he call you view chachma and zikna as two separate things. Yeah. So back to our point over here is in terms of chachma that we say or chachma or zikna, that if there is somebody that's greater, he's for sure the one who benches. Look at Rashi. So Rashi tells us. Rashi says, what do we mean when we say that about chachma and zikna? So it says Rashi, if there's an adam gadol, dika adam gadol, shagadol mavarch kidei paskinon lekamon. That we paskin later on. The hilchasa is that when you have a adam gadol, somebody who's bigger than everybody else, again according to Rashi in chachma or zikna, or maybe chachma and zikna, not 100%. Then that person would bench. Look at the Gemara later on in Mem Zayin, Amud Aleph, towards the bottom, right by the two dots. The Gemara says, "V'hilchas legadol mavarch." If the gadol was the one who benches, even though he came last, but Taisa says no. Look at the bottom Taisa, the third to bottom Taisa. But a cotton is allowed to let the junior ones be mavarach. We had just had the Gemara Gimel Manalef where Rebbe gave Rab Rishus to bench, so that's for sure ability. So we don't paskin that only the gadol benches. So Lamaisa, That in a situation where you have a person who's the big gadol at a meal and clearly greater than everybody else in chachma or zikna, it's not necessarily that he has to bench. He can give permission to others to bench, but you should ask him first, of course. That's the point. So in this situation, we have all three who are equal. The question was, what should they do? Is it better for them to bench, or is it better for them to rely on one of them? Just pick one of them to bench. So I don't understand. What is the question of this Gemara? The Gemara sounds absurd on its face to us, no? Isn't the Gemara? It sounds crazy. What do you mean? Bench and have one guy be making a zimun. What's the question? Why are you losing out on the zimun by having one person bench? Elamai, what is clear from this Gemara? It's clear from this Gemara that when they used to make a zimun, that person would bench and everybody else would not bench. Everybody else would sit there silently and listen. So if the person who's benching is a big gadol, okay. But if they're not, if everybody's sort of at the same level, then maybe each one should be doing separately. Lemaisa, how do we paskin la halacha? We do not paskin that one person benches and everybody sits there. The Shulchan Aruch writes in Kufay Gimel that everybody has to bench. We bench quietly. Everybody has to bench, but you bench quietly. Why is that? The Bach says no, it's better to listen, but we don't agree. The Shulchan Aruch says no, and the Taz explains because in their day they had kavana to listen, but now you have no kavana. So the only way we're going to be able to have a little bit of kavanah is only if we're actually saying it. So we have to actually say the brachas. We can't bench it. We can't just rely on somebody else. Okay, so that's practically la halacha how this would work. Okay, so the Gemara said, so in this situation, what do? Baruch inish l'nafshe. Each one ended up making benching by themselves. Also, they came to Yehuda, right, father. They came to Merimar. He said, yeah, you were yaitzi benching, but you weren't yaitzi zimun. Shkayach. I'm not sure what he's adding to this point, but that's what he said. And they said, well, maybe we should be able to make a zimun now. No, ain't zimun mafred. There's no zimun. Once you're done, you're done. Right, and that is the situation if somebody forgets to make a zimun. You have three people eating together. They forgot. And they ended up benching alone. Can you make a zimun afterwards? No. Once it's done, it's done. It is the Gemara. One is if somebody came along, three people are sitting eating together, and you see that they're benching. And so, what do you say? So they disagree. One says baruch mavarach, one says aina amen. But it's not really machlok. It's the question of when you found them in which part of the benching. When you find them when they're saying nevarech, and one is so then you say baruch mavarach. And one is when you found them saying baruch. When you found them saying nevarech. So I'm a baruch mavarach, right? Then you say baruch mavarach. You can't say baruch shechal mishalai because you didn't eat anything with them. You just came along when they were benching, so you're just a spectator. So you should say something. And the situation, baruch, when you find them saying baruch, then aina amen. Then you're allowed to say amen. Fine, we have to hurry up. So the Gemara continues. We have one verse that says somebody says amen after his own brachas, it's disgusting, and one person who says, and then someone says amen after his own brachas, it's great. So the Gemara says like kash, it's not a machlokes. It's the difference between Bnei Yerushalayim and Shar brachas. And as Rashi explains, what is Bnei Yerushalayim? Shehi seif habrachas. That is the end of the brachas. That's what's required, right? Hateva Meitiv was mitakin and yav, and the Gemara tells us in order of the Harugei Beitar, but it's a later addition. The three main blessings of Birkas Hamazon are ending in Bnei Yerushalayim. So whenever you end off with a series of brachas, so then there is an idea to say amen after. Shehi seif habrachas. As Rashi is a meshubah v'chem b'sei brachas to kriyashma shachas v'arvis. So too in those of the seif brachas of kriyashma of shachas v'arvis. There's also an Indian that I'm not 100% sure how that applies practically. We're not supposed to say amen between God and Yisrael. So I don't God Yisrael and Shemon Esrei. I'm not really sure what Rashi is saying. In any event, I did see some Rishonim who say that it is related to also by Yishtabach. Yishtabach is the end of the brachas of Sukkot Zimra. So there's an Indian to say amen over there perhaps as well. Either way, so we're saying that it's not a machlokes. One is talking about bracha of Bnei Yerushalayim. What do we say? We say, right? Amen. We do say amen, right? We in fact say amen, because that's the end of the series of brachas. Then is the Gemara. Abai used to say, amen. He would say it out loud, so the Poyalim would know that it's now time to go back to work. That Teva Meitiv Lav Daraisa. That Teva Meitiv is not Daraisa. Rav Ashi Anu B'Lachsher. Rashi would say it quietly. So they shouldn't be Bezalzel on Teva Meitiv, and they should take it seriously. We have a similar Gemara like this. If you look at Menachos Memtes, Tzadi Test, the Gemara says it over there about the Heter of Rashbi, that if somebody says Shema, Shachar Shema Ma'arvis says Yotzi Dei V'Yisrael Yom V'Layla Lo Yomush. So the Gemara says, "Machlokes, should you say that out loud, or should you say it quietly?" So one of them says, "Say it out loud. Say it out loud." Why? So that everybody should know that they should feel good about themselves, that they were yotze in the midst of learning that day. And others say, "No, to say it quietly. Don't. They shouldn't think that. They should learn more, not just to rely on Shema. That's not sufficient." Okay. Continue the more now. Mem Vavam and Aleph. From Zera Chalash. From Zera got ill. All the Gabi Ravo came to visit. Kabul Aleh. He was Bekabel on himself. And this is a source for being Kabbalah on oneself, things and situations, in order to help refuah for somebody to take on Kabbalahs. This is a source, and this is Gemara. Refuah is Kabbalah on himself. They said, if the small one with the burnt legs, right? The Gemara about Messiah Pei tells us that Zer used to test himself out to make sure he was a big tzaddik, and every month he would go into the oven, and the rabbis they were a little jealous. So they ended up, giving him a bit of an ayin har or whatever. So he went into the oven one time and he got burned. So they called him Katina Sharach Shuke, right? The little one, because he was Zera was very short, and he had the scorched legs because of the time he was burned. So Ravo was Makabel on himself that if Rav Zera would have Refuah Shalema, Avidna Yom Tov Rabbanan, he's going to make a big party for the rabbis. What do we have? The Avidna Yom Tov Rabbanan, right? We have that Gemara. We have the Gemara Kedushin Lamed Aleph. The famous Gemara of Yosef says that he was blind, so he's not Mechuyev Mitzvah. But if he would be Mechuyev Mitzvah, if somebody could find a source, then Avidna Yom Tov Rabbanan, you would make a Chiyav. That becomes the source for Bar Mitzvahs. When you get a Chiyav, when you become Bar Chiyav, you make a party. Right. The other Gemara says in Shabbos Kufyat Tes, Rabbi says that he would make when the boy or someone would make a siyum on a Gemara, he would make a Yom Tov L'Rabbanan. He should get a Gan Eden tastefully because he used to do such a thing. So that's what he said he would do, Ravo. So Esbach, he got better. Avatzu Dasa L'Kula Rabbanan. Ravo made a big meal for the rabbis. Kimot and Mishri, when it came down to eat, Amarle Lo Rav Zera, Lishri Lamar. So he said to Rav Zera, "No, maybe you should make brachas for us, make hamaitzi for us." So Rabbi Zera didn't take it just because he was ill and you made a whole party for him. No, he still said, don't you hold that? Rabbi Yochanan says that the Baal Bayis should be the one who's benching, who's going to make hamaitzi. Now, I think that maybe he was a little bit upset, Rabbi Zera. Right? No, I didn't say they want to say this. But the Gemara says, Lishri Lod Mar. Remember, we had the Gemara earlier. We had the Gemara before in Laman Aleph. Lishri Lod Mar by the Suda, by the wedding, was to make a song. Right? They said to the rabbi, make a song for us, sing for us. So it's a little bit of a, Rashi says, it means to make hamaitzi. Yes, but it's a way of saying it. Maybe it wasn't exactly the most Mekavitic manner. So maybe Rabbi Zera was a little bit annoyed. In any event, Rabbi Zera said, but Rabbi Yochanan says that the Baal Bayis should be the one who makes hamaitzi, not the guest. So Sharlu, so Rabbi Vo made hamaitzi. Kimar to when it came time to make a berachas hamazon, I'm letting the avrech lamar. So he said to Rabbi Zera, new bench. He says, Lord, Rav Huna has been in Bavel. He says, don't you hold Rav Huna from Bavel? Says, now it's like funny. Rav Huna, of course, is from Bavel. Rav Zera now is living in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Vo is a rabbi in Caesarea. So he's saying, Rav Huna from Bavel, but of course, he's from Bavel. Don't you hold, Rav Huna says that the Beitzea, the one who already made Hamaitzi, has to be the one who benches. What do Rav Vo hold like? He holds like Rabbi Yochanan, Shemash B. Baal Bayis Beitzea v'erech mevarech. Right, the Baal Bayis is the one who makes hamaitzi, and the Eireach and the guest makes the benching. We're going to see that Gemara later on, a whole famous Gemara with Ula. We're going to come to that shortly. And the Gemara says, why is that? Baal Bayis Beitzei for the Baal Bayis Beitzei in order so he should be able to cut nice pieces for everybody. And the Eireach is the one who makes the benching in order so that the Baal Bayis should be able to get a bracha from my Mavarach. What is the bracha? Does the guest give the Baal Bayis? He wrote Shleivish Baal Bayis Baal Mazeh V'Likom Ol Mabov. Rabbi Yosef Moshe Bar Dvarim V'Yatzach Moed B'Chol Nechas V'Nechasim U'Nechasim B'Tochem Kerem Le'ir. V'Yishloi Tzod Loy Masir Loy Masir Dena V'Yizdak Loy L'Fanav Loy L'Fanav Shon V'Arher V'Ched V'Avir V'Avim Ma'atav Arom. Nearly the entire thing that we say. So that's what in many benches now they have it. You're supposed to sit at the Yiratzin in order to give the Baal Bayis a bracha. That's what Erech is doing the benching. All right, we'll stop over here.